The stars were cold and silent when the human ship appeared on the edge of Zephyrian space. Captain Ryan Burke stood on the bridge of the New Horizon, watching the alien patrol ships move toward them like hunters closing in on prey. His hands were steady on the command console, but his heart was beating fast. This was it. First contact with an alien species. "Sir, we're getting a transmission," said Lieutenant Amy Foster from her station. "It's strange. Lots of images mixed with sounds." Commander Jake Morrison moved closer to the main screen. The images that appeared made several crew members step back. Bodies torn apart, cities burning, children screaming. The sounds were worse, screams and cries that seemed to go on forever. "They're trying to scare us," Dr. Lisa Grant said quietly. She was the ship's expert on alien behavior, and she had been studying every piece of information they could gather about these creatures. "This is psychological warfare." Captain Burke nodded. "Standard response to unknown contacts. Let them know we come in peace." The transmission from the aliens continued. More horror, more death, images of entire worlds reduced to glass and ash. The message was clear: surrender or die. Jake watched his crew. Some looked sick, others were angry, but none of them were running. None of them were begging to turn around and go home. "Captain," said Nick Davis from the weapons station, "these aliens really think this stuff will make us give up?" "Apparently," Burke replied. He opened a channel to the alien ships. "This is Captain Ryan Burke of the human vessel New Horizon. We come seeking peaceful contact and exchange of knowledge." The response came quickly. The alien voice was harsh, like metal scraping against stone. "You will surrender your vessel immediately. Resistance will result in your complete destruction. We are the Zephyrian Confederacy. We have conquered 1,000 worlds. You cannot escape us." More images flooded their screens. Alien creatures that looked like giant insects tearing apart smaller beings. Snake-like creatures with too many teeth devouring everything in their path. Crystal beings that seemed to drain the life from anything they touched. Dr. Grant studied the images carefully. "Interesting," she said. "They're showing us their greatest hits. This is how they've been winning wars for centuries. By scaring people to death," Jake asked. "Exactly. Look at this." Lisa pulled up her analysis on a side screen. Every image is designed to trigger maximum fear response. They've turned terror into an art form. The alien transmission continued. Now they were showing what happened to species that fought back. Planets cracked open, entire populations screaming as they died. The message was simple: this is what happens to those who resist us. Captain Burke looked around his bridge. His crew was still at their stations, still doing their jobs. Amy Foster was actually taking notes on the alien language patterns. Nick Davis was studying their ship designs for weaknesses. "Sir," said Dr. Grant, "I think we need to respond to this differently than they expect." "What do you mean?" "They're expecting us to be terrified, to beg for mercy, to surrender without a fight. But look at us." She gestured to the bridge crew. "We're not running. We're analyzing. We're learning." Jake understood. These aliens had been using the same tactics for 1,000 years because they always worked. But humans were different. "Captain," he said, "permission to record a response?" Burke nodded. Jake stepped in front of the communication array. He thought about everything he had seen in the alien transmission. The death, the destruction, the horror. Then he thought about human history, the wars they had fought, the disasters they had survived, the horrors they had created and overcome. "This is Commander Jake Morrison of the human military," he said. "Into the recorder. We have received your transmission. We have seen your images of conquest and destruction." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "We've seen worse. We do worse to each other for fun." The bridge was quiet for a moment. Then Amy Foster started to smile. Nick Davis actually laughed. "Sir," said Dr. Grant, "I think you just broke their psychological warfare system." The alien response came quickly, but this time it was different. The voice sounded confused, almost uncertain. "You do not fear us." Jake leaned forward. "Should we?" More images flooded their screens. Bigger explosions, more death, creatures being eaten alive. The aliens were trying harder now, showing them their worst footage. "Oh," said Amy Foster suddenly. "Oh my, what is it?" Captain Burke asked. "Sir, I just realized something. Back on Earth, we have entire industries built around this stuff. Horror movies, war games, haunted houses. We pay money to be scared." Dr. Grant's eyes went wide. "They're showing us their weapons of mass psychological destruction, and we're rating them like movie critics." The alien transmission stopped suddenly. Then a new voice came through, higher pitched, more nervous. "What are you?" Captain Burke stepped forward. "We're humans. We're from a planet called Earth, and we'd like to talk." "Talk!" The alien voice sounded genuinely confused. "You do not surrender." "No," Burke said simply. "We don't surrender. We adapt. We learn. We overcome. And right now, we're very interested in learning about you." The silence that followed lasted for several minutes. Jake could see the alien ships on the scanner just sitting there, not moving, not attacking, not fleeing. Finally, the alien voice returned. But it was different now, quieter, more careful. "No species has ever. We have conquered worlds with these images alone." "Well," said Dr. Grant, speaking into the communication channel, "you haven't met humans before. We're a bit different." Jake smiled. This was just the beginning. These aliens thought they were the monsters of the galaxy. They thought they knew what terror looked like. They had no idea what humans were capable of. And more importantly, they had no idea what humans had survived to get this far. The real conversation was about to begin. 3 days after the first contact, the Zephyrian High Command was in chaos. For over 1,000 years, their terror tactics had never failed. But these humans were different. They were wrong somehow. .za Earthel, the Nexari xenopsychologist, floated in his crystal chamber deep within the command ship. His crystalline body pulsed with confused colors as he reviewed the human transmissions again and again. Every species had a breaking point. Every mind could be shattered with the right images of horror and death. But not these humans! "Show me the footage again," he commanded his assistant, a smaller Nexari named Veltar. The screens lit up with a human response. The one called Jake Morrison standing calmly in front of the camera, saying those impossible words. "We've seen worse. We do worse to each other for fun. It makes no sense," Zertho muttered. "No species tortures itself for pleasure. No species creates its own nightmares." "Perhaps they are lying," suggested Veltar. "No, I can read stress patterns in their voices. They believe what they are saying. That makes it worse." On the human ship New Horizon, Dr. Lisa Grant was having her own problems understanding the aliens. She sat in her small lab, surrounded by data screens and analysis reports. The alien psychology was completely backwards from everything she knew. "They use fear like we use tools," she said to Amy Forster, who had come to help with the translation work. "But they don't seem to understand what fear actually is." Amy looked up from her language analysis. "What do you mean? Look at this." Lisa pulled up the alien footage on her screen. "They think showing us death and destruction will make us surrender. But they're showing us the wrong things." "Wrong how?" "They're showing us quick deaths, clean explosions, monsters that kill fast." Lisa shook her head. "They don't understand human fear at all." Amy frowned. "So what would actually scare us?" Lisa was quiet for a moment. "Slow things. Being trapped. Watching someone you love suffer and not being able to help. The fear of being forgotten. The fear that nothing we do matters. That's dark, Lisa. That's human. These aliens think big explosions are scary. We make movies about serial killers who hunt people for years. We tell stories about ghosts who never let you rest. We imagine zombies that used to be our friends and family. Meanwhile, Zerthal had decided to study the humans more closely. He sent spy probes to monitor their communications. What he found made his crystal body turn pale blue with shock. The humans were sharing stories with each other, but not normal stories. They were telling each other about their wars. "Listen to this," he said to Veltar, playing back a recording of Nick Davis talking to some other crew members. Back during the water wars of 2341, I spent 3 months in the desert with nothing but sand and radiation. Lost half my unit to the heat before we even saw the enemy. The enemy we did see, well, let's just say they weren't in a talking mood either. Nick's voice was calm, almost cheerful. He was describing hell, and he sounded like he was talking about a camping trip. How can they speak of such things so casually, Veltar asked. It gets worse. Zorthiel said he played another recording, this time of Amy Foster. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the Great Plague of 2298. Whole cities just ... empty. People leaving behind everything they owned because staying meant death. She was only 8 when her parents died. Had to take care of her baby brother by herself for 2 years before the rescue teams found them. Amy's voice was sad, but not broken. She was talking about tragedy like it was just part of life. These humans, Zarthel said slowly, they don't just survive horror, they remember it. They pass it down to their children. But why? Veltar asked. Before Zarthel could answer, another recording started playing. This time it was Dr. Lisa Grant talking to Captain Burke. Sir, I've been thinking about why their psychological warfare doesn't work on us. I think it's because we've already seen the worst things that can happen. We've done them to ourselves. Explain, came Burke's voice. Every human alive today is descended from survivors. Survivors of ice ages, plagues, wars, disasters. The ones who couldn't handle horror died out thousands of years ago. What's left is a species that has been trained by evolution to keep going no matter what. Zarthel's body flashed bright red with alarm. They're not just immune to our terror, weapons. They're immune because they've been through worse. He opened a communication channel to the human ship. He had to understand. Human vessel! This is Zorthel of the Nexari Science Division. I wish to speak with your psychological specialist. The response came quickly. This is Dr. Lisa Grant. I'd be happy to talk. Your species confuses us. We have studied the fear responses of every known form of life. You do not respond correctly to our stimuli. Lisa's voice sounded amused. What do you mean by correctly? You should be terrified. You should surrender. You should beg for mercy. Well, that's not really how we work. Can I ask you something? Yes. Do your people tell scary stories to your children? Zarthel was confused. No. Why would we frighten our young? We do. We tell them about monsters and dangers and scary things. Not to hurt them, but to prepare them. By the time a human child is 10 years old, they've imagined every horrible thing that could happen to them. That is ... cruel. No, it's training. When real danger comes, we're ready for it. We've already thought about it. We've already planned how to survive it. Zerthal felt something he had never experienced before. It was cold and sharp and made his crystal body dim with terror. He was beginning to understand. The humans weren't just survivors. They were a species that had weaponized its own trauma. They had turned their pain into strength, their fear into preparation. Dr. Grant, he said, his voice shaking, what is the most frightening thing in your entertainment media? Oh, that's easy. The really scary stuff isn't about monsters or aliens. It's about ordinary people who slowly realize that everything they believed about their world is wrong. Or stories where the hero tries their best but fails anyway, and everyone they love dies because of choices they made. Zarthel's body went completely transparent with fear. You create stories where the good people lose all the time. We call them tragedies. Some of our greatest art is about failure and loss and the meaninglessness of existence. We find it ... interesting. The communication channel went quiet. Zarthel floated in his chamber, trying to process what he had learned. The Zephyrian Confederacy had ruled through fear for 1,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of worlds by showing them death and destruction. But they had just met a species that created death and destruction as entertainment. A species that had already imagined every horrible thing that could happen and had decided to keep going anyway. For the first time in his long life, Zartho understood what terror really felt like. Hi, Klaxon Vexstar was angry. His insect-like body clicked and buzzed as he paced in the command center of the Terra fleet. For 1,200 years, no species had resisted the Zephyrian Confederacy. Now these humans were making him look weak. They mock us, he hissed to his second-in-command. Word is spreading to the other worlds. The conquered species are starting to whisper. What are your orders? High Klaxon, Vexter-S compound eyes glowed red. We make an example. Choose one of their colony worlds. We will show the galaxy what happens to those who defy us. The target was New Denver, a small human colony on the edge of their space. Only 50,000 people lived there, mostly farmers and miners. It seemed like an easy target. Colonel Beth Turner was having coffee in her office when the first warning came through. She was the military commander of New Denver's defense forces, which consisted of about 200 soldiers and some old defense satellites. Ma'am, we've got multiple contacts approaching the system, reported Sergeant Sam Rodriguez from the communications center. Big ships, really big. Beth set down her coffee and walked to the command center. The screen showed dozens of alien vessels moving toward their planet. This was it, the war everyone had been expecting. Send a message to Earth Command, she ordered. Tell them we're about to be attacked. Then get me a colony-wide broadcast channel. Within minutes, every person on New Denver was watching their screens as Colonel Turner appeared. People of New Denver, we are about to be visited by the Zip Confederacy. They're the ones who've been conquering other worlds using fear tactics. I want everyone to stay calm and follow emergency procedures. She paused, looking directly into the camera. Also, I want to remind everyone that this is the same species that thinks showing us pictures of explosions will make us surrender. So, don't expect too much. On the approaching alien fleet, Vextar was preparing his greatest terror weapon. The Nightmare Broadcaster could project images directly into the minds of every living being on a planet. No one could escape it. No one could ignore it. Begin the terror broadcast, he commanded. The images flooded into every human mind on New Denver. Children being eaten alive, cities burning, people screaming as they died in horrible ways. The pain was meant to be unbearable. But something strange happened in the colony's main cafeteria. A group of miners were watching the alien ships on the news when the Nightmare broadcast hit. For a moment, they all went quiet as the horrible images filled their minds. Then old Pete Watson, who had been mining asteroids for 30 years, spoke up. Well, that's unpleasant. Anyone else getting space monster visions? Or is it just me? Yeah, I got him too, said Maria Santos, a farmer who had survived the drought wars. Pretty standard stuff. Giant bugs eating people, cities exploding, feels like a Tuesday. I give it a 6 out of 10, added young Tom Baker, a recent arrival from Mars. The explosions are okay, but I've seen better special effects in movies. Within an hour, the colony had turned the alien terror broadcast into a betting pool. People were guessing what horrible image would come next and rating them for creativity. Hi, Klaxon. Vextar watched his screens in disbelief. The terror broadcast that had broken entire civilizations was being ignored. Sir, reported his communication officer, we're receiving a transmission from the planet. Put it through. The voice that came through belonged to Colonel Beth Turner. This is New Denver Colony 2, Alien Fleet. We've received your psychological warfare broadcast. We have a few comments. Vextar-S mandibles clicked nervously. Comments. First, the image quality could be better. Some of those explosions look pretty fake. Second, you're going to need to try harder than giant bugs if you want to scare people who grew up watching horror movies. Third, is that really the best you can do? We have destroyed civilizations with those images? Well, yeah, but those weren't humans. Look, we appreciate the effort, but we've been scaring ourselves with stories about monsters since we learned to talk. Your stuff is pretty basic. Vex felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt? Deploy the pain generators, he ordered his fleet. The pain generators were Zephyrian technology that could cause intense physical agony in any living being. They had been used to torture information from captured enemies. Surely the humans would break under this. The wave of pain hit New Denver like a physical blow. Every person on the planet felt it at the same time. Burning, cutting, crushing pain that should have left them screaming and begging for mercy. Instead, Sam Rodriguez activated the colony-wide communication system and spoke to everyone at once. Okay, everyone, we're now experiencing some kind of alien pain rate. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say this is about a 7. Anyone who's had kidney stones will probably recognize this feeling. Remember to breathe through it. Across the colony, people started comparing the alien torture to their own experiences. Not as bad as my back surgery, said one elderly woman. Reminds me of that time I got food poisoning on Europa, added a young man. I've had worse periods, commented a teenage girl, which made her mother laugh despite the pain. Hi, Klaxon was beginning to panic. Nothing was working. These humans were treating his ultimate weapons like minor inconveniences. Sir, his communication officer said, the humans are broadcasting again. Colonel Turner's voice came through the speakers. Alien fleet, this is Colonel Beth Turner. We've now experienced your terror broadcast and your pain generator. We have a proposal. What? What kind of proposal? How about you land some troops and we settle this the old-fashioned way? You know, actual fighting instead of trying to scare us to death. Vextor's pride was wounded. No primitive species had ever challenged the Zephyrian military to direct combat. They were always too terrified to fight. Very well, human. I will personally lead a ground assault. When I am done with you, your people will understand true terror. Looking forward to it, Turner replied. Fair warning, though, we fight a little differently than your other enemies. How so? We don't fight to look scary. We fight to win. 2 hours later, Vextar stood on the surface of New Denver with 1,000 of his best warriors. Across from him, Colonel Turner waited with her small force of defenders. The Zephyrian force was impressive. 12-foot-tall insect warriors with razor-sharp claws and armor that could stop most weapons. They had conquered hundreds of worlds. The human force looked tiny in comparison. 200 soldiers with basic weapons and light armor. Surrender now, Vextar called out, and I will make your death quick. Colonel Turner smiled. You know what? You talk too much. She raised her rifle and fired. The shot hit Vextar in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him to the ground. Green blood splattered on the rocky surface. For a moment, everything was silent. The great high Klaxon Vextor, terror of 1,000 worlds, was bleeding from a wound caused by a simple human weapon. Then one of the Zephyrian warriors made a sound no one had ever heard before. It was high-pitched and full of panic. Their leader was hurt. Their invincible commander was on the ground, bleeding. If he could be wounded, then he could be killed. If he could be killed, then so could they. For the first time in their history, the Zephyrian warriors felt something their enemies had always felt when facing them. They felt afraid. Colonel Turner stood over the wounded alien leader, her rifle still smoking. Now, she said calmly, let's talk about surrender. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Hi, Klaxon Vextar. The terror of 1,000 worlds had been wounded by a human with a simple rifle. For the first time in over a millennium, the Zephyrian Confederacy had been made to bleed. Admiral Kate Sullivan received a report while her fleet was traveling through hyperspace toward the Zephyrian core systems. She was a veteran of the Mars Rebellion and had seen her share of fighting. But this was different. This was humanity's first real war with aliens. Ma'am, said her communications officer, we're getting transmissions from all over Zephyrian space. Conquered species are asking if the reports are true. Kate looked at the star charts on her screen. Hundreds of worlds, billions of beings who had lived under Zephyrian terror for centuries. Open a channel to all frequencies, she ordered. Let's talk to everyone at once. Her image was broadcast across dozens of star systems, reaching every conquered world in Zephyrian space. This is Admiral Kate Sullivan of the human fleet. The reports are true. The Zephyrians are not invincible. They bleed just like everyone else, and we're going to prove it. On the Zephyrian homeworld, panic was spreading through the capital city. Citizens who had never known fear were experiencing it for the first time. Their leaders spoke in hushed voices about the humans and their impossible resistance to terror. Dr. Alex Chin was having the time of his life as Earth's expert in psychological warfare. He had been given unlimited resources to develop new tactics against the Zephyrians. His project was called Mirror, and it was beautifully simple. If they want to use psychology as a weapon, he explained to his team, then we'll give them psychology they can't handle. The first Mirror broadcast went out to every Zephyrian world simultaneously. But instead of showing horror and death, it showed something much worse. It showed human history. The broadcast started with images of Earth during the Ice Ages. Humans huddled around fires, fighting off massive predators with nothing but stone tools and determination. Then it showed the plagues that had killed millions and how the survivors had rebuilt their civilizations from nothing. It showed the wars humans had fought against each other, not the quick, clean deaths the Zephyrians preferred, but long, grinding conflicts that lasted for years. Soldiers who kept fighting even when they were starving and wounded. It showed natural disasters, earthquakes that leveled cities and humans, digging through the rubble with their bare hands to save their neighbors, floods that destroyed everything, and humans rebuilding in the same place because they refused to give up. But the worst part was the commentary. Dr. Chen had included interviews with human survivors, talking about their experiences in calm, matter-of-fact voices. The tornado took everything we owned, said an elderly woman from Kansas House Barn, all our animals. But we just built it all back up again. What else are you going to do? Lost my whole unit in the desert, said a veteran of the African campaigns. Walked for 6 days with no water, carrying my wounded sergeant on my back. You do what you have to do. The cancer was pretty bad, said a young man from Lunar Colony. 3 years of treatment, lost all my hair, couldn't keep food, down, but I had things to do, you know. Couldn't die yet. On the Zephyrian world, the reaction was immediate and devastating. These creatures who had spent their lives inflicting terror suddenly understood what real survival looked like. They weren't watching weapons of war. They were watching a species that had turned suffering into strength, that had made peace with pain, that had learned to thrive in conditions that would destroy any other form of life. Zoethel, the Nexari xenopsychologist, watched the human broadcasts from his crystal chamber and felt his sanity cracking. Everything he understood about fear and psychology was wrong. They don't just survive trauma, he whispered to himself. They use it as fuel. The Mirror broadcasts continued. Videos of human children playing games that would terrify adult Zephyrians. Teenagers reading books about serial killers and zombies. For fun, adults paying money to be scared in haunted houses and horror movies. But the part that broke the Zephyrian psyche was simpler than that. It was footage of human parents teaching their children about the world. Now, honey, if someone ever tries to hurt you, you fight back as hard as you can, a mother was saying to her 5-year-old daughter. You bite, you scratch, you scream, you run. You never give up. But what if they're bigger than me? The little girl asked. Then you get creative. Use whatever you can find. Remember, there's no such thing as fighting fair when someone is trying to hurt you. The Zephyrians watched in horror as human parents deliberately taught their children to be dangerous. This wasn't a military training. This was basic child-rearing. Admiral Sullivan's fleet reached the first major Zephyrian world 3 days after the Mirror broadcasts began. She expected to fight a desperate battle against a cornered enemy. Instead, she found the orbital defenses powered down and a transmission waiting for her. Human fleet, this is Governor Vexonal of the Vorthok. We wish to surrender. Kate was surprised. Surrender! We have seen your broadcasts. We understand now. We cannot defeat you. We cannot break you. We cannot even frighten you. What you call childhood, we call nightmare. What you call entertainment, we call psychological torture. And we wish to learn. How do you survive such things? How do you turn pain into strength? How do you face the darkness and not go insane? Kate thought about it for a moment. Throughout human space, her people were watching this conversation. The first alien species to ask for help instead of demanding surrender. Governor Vexonal, are you asking us to teach you? Yes, we have spent so long learning how to create fear that we never learned how to overcome it. Your species has mastered something we thought was impossible. And what's that? You have mastered yourselves. The conversation was broadcast across the galaxy. Other conquered species heard it and began to understand. The humans weren't just another empire trying to replace the Zephyrians. They were something entirely different. On dozens of worlds, alien species began to stand up to their Zephyrian overlords, not with weapons or armies, but with something simpler and more powerful. They began to ask questions. Why should we be afraid of you? What gives you the right to rule us? What happens if we just say no? The Zephyrian Empire began to crumble, not from military defeat, but from a simple realization that had spread across the galaxy like a virus. Fear only worked if you let it. Dr. Chen watched the reports coming in from across Zephyrian space and smiled. The Mirror Project was working better than he had hoped. By showing the aliens what human survival looked like, they had accidentally taught every conquered species in the galaxy the most important lesson humans had ever learned. You could survive anything if you refused to quit. High Klaxon, vexed, still recovering from his wound on New Denver, received the reports from across his crumbling empire. World after world was refusing to obey. His terror fleets were abandoning their posts. His own people were asking questions he had no answers for. He opened a communication channel to the human fleet. Admiral Sullivan, this is High Klaxon Vextar. I wish to speak with you. Kate's image appeared on his screen. She looked tired, but determined. What do you want to talk about? How do we stop this? How do we make it go back to the way it was? Kate was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. You broke something that can't be fixed. You taught the galaxy to be afraid, and now they're learning not to be. There's no going back from that. Then what happens to us? That depends. Are you willing to learn something new? Vextar's compound eyes dimmed with exhaustion. What would you teach us? How to live without fear, how to build instead of destroy, how to be strong without making others weak. And if we refuse, Kate shrugged, then you'll be left behind. The galaxy is changing, with or without you. The choice is yours. For the first time in his long life, High Klaxon Vextar felt something other than anger or pride. He felt hope. 2 years after the fall of the Zephyrian Empire, President Maria Santos stood in the newly built Galactic Council chambers on the neutral world of Haven. Representatives from over 300 species sat in the Great Hall, working together to build something that had never existed before. A government based on cooperation instead of fear. It hadn't been easy. Some worlds had fallen into chaos when the Zephyrians left. Others had tried to build their own little empires. But slowly, with human help, the galaxy was learning to govern itself. Maria looked out at the assembled delegates and smiled. Sitting in the front row was former High Klaxon Vextar, now calling himself simply Vex. He was one of the most surprising success stories of the New Order. The floor recognizes Delegate Vex of the former Zephyrian territories, Maria announced. Vex stood up slowly. His once proud insect body looked smaller now, humbler. He had been attending human-led therapy sessions for over a year, learning to deal with emotions he had never experienced before. Thank you, President Santos. I come before this council to report on the progress of the rehabilitation centers in our former military zones. His voice was different now, softer, less commanding. We have successfully converted 17 terror weapon facilities into medical research centers. Our former pain generation technology is now being used to help beings with chronic illnesses. The fear broadcasting equipment has been repurposed for long-distance communication systems. He paused, looking down at his notes with what humans had learned to recognize as embarrassment. I must also report that we have had another incident with one of our former terror specialists attempting to return to old methods. Dr. Lisa Grant's team was called in to provide counseling. Maria nodded. Thank you, Vex. Dr. Grant, would you like to update us on the psychological rehabilitation program? Dr. Lisa Grant stood up from her seat in the human delegation. She had become one of the most important people in the galaxy, teaching former oppressors how to heal from the damage they had done to themselves and others. Thank you, President Santos. The rehabilitation program is showing remarkable success. We've learned that species who use fear as a weapon eventually become afraid of everything, including themselves. The therapy work is helping them rediscover what it means to feel safe. She activated a holographic display showing statistics from across the galaxy. 78% of former Zephyrian military personnel are successfully transitioning to civilian roles. Many are choosing careers in construction, medicine, and education, jobs that create rather than destroy. An alien delegate from the Rigel system raised a tentacled appendage. Dr. Grant, how do you teach beings who have never known safety to feel secure? Lisa smiled. The same way humans have always learned it, through community, through helping others, and through understanding that strength comes from lifting people up, not tearing them down. Admiral Jake Morrison, now in charge of the new Galactic Defense Force, stood to give his report. President Santos, I'm happy to report that we have had zero conflicts between member worlds in the past 6 months. The joint defense exercises are working well, with species that used to be enemies now training together. Any challenges? Maria asked. Jake grinned. Well, we had to redesign all the obstacle courses. Turns out what humans consider basic training is seen as advanced torture by most other species. Laughter rippled through the chamber. It was a sound that would have been impossible 2 years ago when fear ruled the galaxy. President Santos looked around the room. In the back, she could see Amy Foster working with a group of young aliens, teaching them human languages and customs. Nick Davis was consulting with former Zephyrian engineers on peaceful uses for their technology. But the most remarkable sight was in the children's section. Young beings from dozens of different species were playing together, sharing stories and learning from each other. They were growing up in a galaxy where cooperation was normal and fear was something their parents told them about, not something they lived with every day. Before we adjourn, Maria said, I'd like to address something that's been on many of our minds, the question of what we call ourselves now that we're no longer separate empires and conquered territories. An XRE delegate, one of Zothal's former colleagues, raised a crystalline appendage. President Santos, many of us have been calling it the human model. Maria shook her head. With respect, this isn't the human model. This is just what happens when people stop being afraid of each other and start working together. Humans didn't invent cooperation or kindness or courage. We just happened to be the species that showed up when the galaxy needed to remember these things. Vex stood up again. President Santos, may I say something? Of course. When I was High Klaxon, I believed that strength came from making others fear you. I thought that power meant control, and control meant pain. I was wrong about everything. His voice was steady now, confident in a way that was completely different from his old arrogance. The humans taught us that real strength comes from facing your own fears. Real power comes from helping others become strong. Real control comes from choosing to do the right thing even when no one is watching. He looked around the chamber at all the different species working together. We spent 1,000 years teaching the galaxy to be afraid. The humans spent 2 years teaching it to be brave. I know which lesson was more important. President Santos smiled. Thank you, Vex. That brings me to our final piece of business today, the establishment of the Survival Training Academy. The academy was Dr. Alex Chen's idea. After seeing how effective human psychological techniques were against the Zephyrians, he had proposed teaching these skills to other species. The academy will teach practical survival skills, emotional resilience, and crisis management to representatives from every member world, Maria explained. The goal is not to make everyone like humans, but to give everyone the tools they need to handle whatever challenges they might face. A small voice came from the children's section. President Santos! Maria looked down to see a young Zephyrian child, one of the first generation to grow up without the Empire's terror training. Yes, dear, my human friend told me a story about something called Halloween, where humans dress up as scary things for fun. Can we do that here? The chamber fell silent for a moment. Then Maria started laughing. I think that's a wonderful idea. Dr. Grant, would you be willing to organize a multi-species Halloween celebration? I'd be honored, Lisa replied. Grinning as the session ended and delegates began filing out, Maria noticed Vex talking quietly with a group of human children. She moved closer to listen. But why do humans tell scary stories to their children? A young Zephyrian was asking. One of the human children, a girl of about 8, thought about it seriously. So we won't be scared when the real monsters show up. But what if there are no real monsters? The young alien asked. The human girl smiled. Then we'll know we were strong enough to keep them away. Maria watched the conversation and felt something. She had been feeling a lot lately. Hope, not just for humanity, but for everyone. The galaxy had learned something important. Fear was a tool that could be used to control people, but courage was a gift that could be shared with everyone, and sharing it made everyone stronger. Later that evening, as Maria walked through the gardens of Haven, she found Vex sitting alone by a fountain, watching the stars. "How are you doing?" she asked, sitting down beside him. "Better," he said simply. "Some days are harder than others. It's strange, learning to live without fear after so many centuries. What's the hardest part?" Vex was quiet for a long time. "Forgiving myself, understanding that I can't undo the harm I caused, but I can choose to do better now." Maria nodded. "That's very human of you, is it?" "Yes. Humans spend a lot of time learning to forgive themselves and each other. It's one of our most important skills." They sat in comfortable silence, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, on hundreds of worlds, former enemies were working together. Children were playing without fear. People were building instead of destroying. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was better. And for the first time in galactic history, that was enough.